Hi, I'm Jennifer, and welcome to the Haunted Hour, a remote cabin, a silent stranger, a night that never ends. What started as a dream vacation is about to become a living nightmare. Are you ready? Let's begin. Story 1. Last spring break of my life. Every year, spring break was a time for fun and freedom. But for Alex, his final spring break, before graduation, turned into a nightmare he would never forget. Alex and 3 close friends, Ben, Sarah, and Mia, planned a road trip to a remote beach town known for its quiet shores and mysterious history. They rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a place with peeling white paint, overgrown gardens, and a strange air of abandonment. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the place, warning that odd things happened after dark, but the friends laughed it off. They were ready for adventure, not realizing that this would be the last spring break of Alex's life in every sense. The first day was filled with sunshine, laughter, and long walks along the beach. The friends played volleyball, swam in the cool ocean, and enjoyed long nights under the stars. But as the sun began to set on the second day, the mood shifted. Alex noticed that the wind carried a strange chill, and the sound of the waves seemed to blend with soft, distant whispers. At dinner, while the group sat around the creaky wooden table in the cabin, Ben mentioned how he felt like someone was watching from outside the window. Sarah laughed it off, but Mia's eyes darted nervously toward the darkened glass. The whispers grew louder as twilight turned to night, and a deep sense of foreboding settled over them. That night, as the cabin lay silent except for the sound of rain tapping on the roof, Alex awoke to a slow, rhythmic tapping on the window. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but when he looked out, he saw a faint, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the garden, its face hidden in darkness. The figure disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only a trail of cold air. Heart pounding, Alex tried to convince himself it was his imagination. He closed his eyes and went back to sleep, unaware that the night was only beginning. In the early hours of the next morning, the friends gathered in the living room to discuss the strange events of the previous night. Ben confessed that he had seen movement in the hallway, like a long, dark silhouette sliding silently across the floor. Sarah mentioned a sudden gust of wind that blew out all the candles as she sat alone in the corner, leaving her in total darkness for a few heart-stopping seconds. Mia, trembling, revealed that she had heard soft crying coming from the attic. The group decided to investigate, determined to find a logical explanation for these eerie happenings. Armed with flashlights and a strong sense of curiosity, they climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a dusty, cramped space filled with old furniture and boxes that held memories of decades past. In the attic's far corner, they discovered a battered mirror with a frame covered in intricate carvings. As they examined it, the air grew colder, and the reflection in the mirror began to distort. For a split second, they saw behind them a pale face with hollow eyes, staring intently, before the image snapped back to normal. The sudden glimpse sent a surge of terror through them, and they quickly left the attic, their minds racing with questions. That afternoon, the weather turned ominous. Dark clouds covered the sky, and an unsettling stillness replaced the usual sound of the crashing waves. Alex, determined to uncover the history of the cabin, visited the small-town library. There, in faded records and old newspaper clippings, he learned that the cabin once belonged to a family who vanished without a trace during a storm many years ago. Rumors told of a daughter, a sensitive and lonely girl who had spent her days watching the ocean and her nights whispering to unseen friends. Some believed that her spirit had never left the cabin, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, returning to the cabin with a heavy heart. Alex shared his findings with his friends. They all felt a chill as the wind howled outside, as if the past were reaching out to them. That night, after a tense dinner, the group tried to relax with a board game in the living room. The room was dimly lit by a few old lanterns that cast long, wavering shadows. Just as they started to play, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. At first, it sounded distant and slow, like someone pacing back and forth. Then, the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside the living room door. With a sudden, heart-stopping crash, the door burst open, and a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lanterns and plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, Alex's heart raced. A faint, ghostly whisper floated around them, barely audible over their panicked breaths. "Help me." The voice moaned, echoing in the silence. Ben fumbled for his phone, using its light to guide them as they huddled together. The door slowly creaked shut on its own, leaving them with only the trembling light and the sound of their own racing pulses. In that moment, every creak, every whisper, sent shockwaves of terror through them. They knew something was in the house with them, something that had not been at rest for decades. If you have come so far into this story, I'd like you to give a thumbs up. Let's keep a target of 100 likes and subscribe to our channel for more such content. Let's continue. Over the next few hours, the terror escalated. The sound of soft crying filled the hallways, accompanied by sudden, violent bangs that echoed from the upstairs rooms. In one particularly horrifying moment, while the group sat frozen in the living room, the floor beneath them began to tremble, as if a giant creature was moving below. The walls seemed to close in, and the temperature dropped drastically. In a flash, a disembodied hand appeared, reaching out from the darkness and grabbing at the air, its fingers brushing against Ben's shoulder before vanishing. A sharp scream broke the silence as Ben recoiled, his eyes wide with fear. Desperate to understand the ghostly presence, Alex convinced the others to help him perform a simple ritual he had read about in a dusty old book at the library. The ritual was meant to communicate with the spirit, to learn her sorrow, and, if possible, free her from her torment. Gathering in a circle in the main room, the friends lit a few candles and, with trembling voices, called out to the spirit of the long-lost daughter. The air grew heavy and still, and for a few excruciating minutes, nothing happened. Then, as if drawn by their plea, the temperature dropped further, and the candles flickered violently. A soft, sad melody began to play, a lullaby that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the center of the circle, a shadow formed and slowly took shape. The friends watched in terror as the ghostly figure of a young woman, with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes filled with eternal sorrow, her voice, soft and plaintive, filled the room. "I am lost, trapped in the storm of my own despair. Please help me find peace." The sight was both heartbreaking and horrifying. For a moment, the friends felt compassion for her, despite the terror that gripped their hearts. But before they could speak further, a sudden, violent crash echoed from outside. The windows shattered, sending shards of glass flying, and the ghost's anguished cry merged with the roar of the storm. In the chaos, the figure dissolved into a swirl of mist, leaving the room in darkness once more. As the storm raged outside, the friends huddled together, their minds reeling from the ordeal. They spent the rest of the night in a tense, sleepless vigil, listening to the relentless pounding of the rain and the occasional, mournful whisper that drifted through the corridors. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the storm clouds, it revealed a scene of quiet devastation. The cabin's interior was in disarray. Broken furniture, scattered belongings, and a deep, unsettling silence that spoke of the chaos of the previous night. In the days that followed, the terror slowly subsided, but the memory of that spring break would haunt Alex and his friends forever. They left the cabin with a heavy heart, each silently vowing never to return to that place of sorrow and restless spirits. For Alex, that spring break became known as the last break of his life, a time when the thin veil between the living and the dead was torn apart, and he witnessed horrors that no one should ever have to see. Years later, whenever Alex thought back to that final spring break, his heart still raced, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He knew that some spirits, burdened by their own tragedies, never truly leave, and that the past, with all its pain and sorrow, could reach out from the darkness at any moment. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the rain battered the windows, Alex would sometimes hear a faint lullaby, a reminder of the ghostly girl who had touched his final spring break. A final, haunting goodbye from the other side. Still here? Enjoying our content? If yes, leave a thumbs up, and if no, then comment a poop emoji in the comments. Remember the target of 100 likes and subscribe to our channel for more such content. Let's continue to the next story. Story 2: The Spring Break Shadows. During spring break, a group of 5 college friends, Tyler, Maria, Dean, Jasmine, and Oliver, decided to escape the chaos of campus life by renting a remote lakeside cabin deep in the woods. The cabin, surrounded by towering pines and a glassy lake that mirrored the sky, promised a peaceful retreat. But as they drove down the winding dirt road, a heavy fog began to roll in, blanketing the landscape in an eerie mist. The friends joked about the spooky scenery, unaware that the atmosphere was more than just nature's mood. It was the prelude to a nightmare. On their first night, after settling into the rustic cabin with its creaking wooden floors and antique furniture, the group gathered around a crackling fire. The cool spring air and distant sounds of the forest added to the charm. Yet, as the fire flickered, the shadows around them danced in unsettling ways. Tyler, ever the skeptic, dismissed the jittery silhouettes as tricks of the light, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching from just beyond the firelight. When laughter turned to silence as a soft, barely audible whisper seemed to echo from the darkness, the friends exchanged uneasy glances. They continued their conversation, trying to ignore the creeping dread that made their skin crawl. The following morning, the friends awoke to a scene that defied explanation. The fog had lifted, but the lake's surface was disturbed by an unusual pattern of ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. Dean, curious and fearless, ventured out to investigate, only to find strange, muddy footprints leading from the water's edge into the forest. The prints were unlike any animal they knew and disappeared abruptly among dense trees. Though the friends tried to rationalize the phenomenon as the work of an unknown wildlife, Jasmine felt a cold shiver each time she recalled the footprints, as if they were the first sign of something far more sinister. As dusk fell on the second night, a storm gathered over the lake. The wind howled through the trees, and rain pounded on the cabin's roof. Inside, the power flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. With only a few flashlights and the sound of the raging storm as company, the group huddled in the living room. Suddenly, the cabin's silence was shattered by a loud, resounding crash from the back room. Oliver, his face pale, grabbed a flashlight and cautiously crept toward the sound. In the narrow hallway, the beam of his light revealed an open door that should have been firmly shut. Pushing it open, he found nothing but a room full of old, dusty furniture, until a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him. His scream echoed as he spun around, convinced he had seen a shadow dart behind the furniture, its form too vague, yet undeniably menacing. The jump scare left the friends rattled, and they gathered together, their nervous laughter unable to mask the fear building within them. Later that night, as the storm subsided and an uneasy calm settled over the cabin, Maria lay awake, listening to the soft creaks of the old structure. Then, she heard it, a faint melody, like a music box playing a haunting tune, drifting from the attic. The sound was so delicate and sad that it pulled at her heart, yet it carried an unmistakable sense of foreboding. Unable to sleep, she convinced the others to join her in investigating the source. Together, they climbed the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic. The room was filled with relics of the past. Old trunks, faded photographs, and dusty heirlooms. In the center of the attic sat a small, ornate music box, its lid open and playing that ghostly tune. As they approached, the tune abruptly stopped, and the attic fell silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing that none of them could locate. In that moment, Jasmine swore she saw a pale face in one of the dusty mirrors, eyes filled with sorrow and pleading. The sudden sight made everyone step back in terror, and the music box's lid slammed shut on its own, echoing through the darkened space like a final warning. The following day brought no relief. The once charming cabin now felt oppressive, as if weighed down by an unseen presence. Outside, the footprints by the lake had multiplied, weaving a bizarre pattern that led straight to the cabin's back door. Tyler, ever the brave one, suggested they follow the trail to discover its origin, with hearts pounding and flashlights in hand. The friends ventured into the damp forest. The further they walked, the more the woods seemed to close in around them. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, felt amplified. At one point, they came across an ancient stone marker, half buried in the underbrush. Its surface was covered in strange symbols that none could decipher, and it emanated a cold energy that made their skin crawl. The marker seemed to whisper of tragedies long forgotten, and for a brief moment, the air turned icy, as if the forest itself exhaled a warning. Returning to the cabin as dusk settled, the group was visibly shaken. They decided to lock all the doors and windows, determined to make it through the night safely. But the sense of dread persisted. Around midnight, while the friends attempted to rest in the living room, a series of sudden, disjointed sounds shattered the silence. A door creaked open in the hallway, then slammed shut with a force that rattled the very walls. Footsteps echoed overhead, moving in a random pattern that defied the logic of the empty cabin. In a terrifying jump scare, a window shattered, sending glass flying across the room, and a cold, ghostly wind swept through, extinguishing their flashlights momentarily. In that split second of total darkness, each friend felt a cold hand brush against their shoulder, and a voice, so faint yet unmistakably sorrowful, whispered, "Help me." The lights flickered back on, revealing nothing but their panicked faces and the chaos left behind. Desperate and terrified, the friends gathered to decide what to do next. They recalled the strange symbols on the stone marker and wondered if they were connected to the spirit haunting the cabin. Maria suggested they try to contact the entity to understand its pain rather than fight it blindly. Though fear gripped their hearts, they set up a makeshift seance in the living room. They joined hands and, with trembling voices, called out to any spirit present. The room grew frigid, and the lights dimmed to a low, ghostly glow. For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, the front door creaked open slowly, and a figure stood in the doorway. A translucent woman with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes filled with grief. Her presence was both tragic and terrifying. She spoke in a voice that resonated with centuries of sorrow, telling them that she had been wronged and trapped in the woods long ago. The symbols on the stone marker were part of a ritual meant to bind her spirit to this land. But the ritual had gone awry, condemning her to an existence of pain and loneliness. The spirit's mournful lament filled the room, and the friends felt an overwhelming urge to help her find peace. Moved by her sorrow, and despite their terror, the friends resolved to break the curse. They gathered clues from old diaries they found in the cabin and pieced together the tragic story of a young woman who had fallen in love with a traveler during a past spring break. A love that ended in betrayal and a violent death. Her spirit had been bound to the land ever since, doomed to wander the forest and haunt any place where her story might be remembered. With trembling determination, they set out to perform a small ritual at the stone marker. Under the light of a waning moon, They arranged a circle of candles and recited words of forgiveness and release. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as the ritual reached its climax. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the candles in a single, dramatic moment. In the silence that followed, the friends saw the ghostly figure appear once more, her expression softening as she looked upon them with gratitude. With a final, heart-wrenching sigh, she faded into the night, leaving behind a lingering sense of peace and a silence that spoke of an old wound finally healing. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences at the cabin ceased, the footprints by the lake vanished, and the unsettling whispers were replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. The friends returned to campus, forever changed by the terrifying yet redemptive experience of that spring break. They carried with them a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, empathy and understanding could break the chains of a haunting past. Yet, on stormy nights when the wind howled through the trees, they would sometimes catch a glimpse of a pale figure wandering the woods, a silent guardian of a sorrowful tale, ensuring that the lost spirit was never forgotten. I know you have liked the video, but for those who didn't, please do. Don't you want to see me happy? Story 3. The Spring Break I Wish I Never Remember. During the last spring break before college, a group of 4 friends, Ethan, Chloe, Marcus, and Lily, decided to escape the stress of final exams by renting a small beach house on a secluded stretch of coastline. The house was old and weathered, with peeling paint and creaky wooden floors that groaned under every step. Even though the place had a history of strange events, the friends laughed it off, eager for an adventure that would mark the end of their high school days. They arrived on a bright morning, full of hope and excitement. But soon the bright day would give way to a darkness they could never forget. On the first evening, after a day spent laughing on the beach and sharing stories by a roaring bonfire, the group gathered in the living room of the beach house. The air was cool, and the sound of the crashing waves provided a soothing backdrop. As they joked and played games, Ethan noticed that something was off. A soft murmur, like a distant whisper, seemed to echo through the empty halls of the house. At first, he thought it was just the wind or their imaginations running wild. But when the lights began to flicker and a chill ran down his spine, he knew that something was not right. The room grew unusually silent, and the laughter of the friends faded, as if the house itself had swallowed all sound. In that tense moment, a heavy thud came from upstairs, a sound like footsteps pacing back and forth. The jump scare sent shivers through each of them, and though they tried to calm their racing hearts, an uneasy feeling settled over the night. The next morning, the friends awoke to a thick fog blanketing the shoreline, muffling the sounds of the sea and the distant calls of birds. While they made breakfast and planned another day of fun, Marcus discovered odd marks on the wooden banister. Small scratch marks that looked almost like claw marks. They were deep and deliberate, and none of them had seen any animal around. Lily recalled a local legend about a spirit that roamed these shores, a ghost of a young person who had died in a tragic accident during a storm decades ago. Though skeptical at first, the evidence of the strange scratches and the lingering feeling of being watched made them pause. They decided to set off for a walk along the beach to clear their minds, not realizing that the ghostly presence was beginning to take shape around them. As they strolled along the misty beach, the mood turned eerie. The fog swirled mysteriously around their feet, and every now and then, one of them thought they saw a pale figure dart behind a rock or near a cluster of seaweed. Chloe's eyes widened when she caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A figure standing still in the shallows of the ocean, its outline blurred by the mist. When she pointed it out, the figure vanished without a trace. Their laughter turned to nervous whispers as the group hurried back to the house. That evening, they gathered around a small table to discuss what they had seen. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden, loud knock at the door. With trembling hands, Ethan opened it, only to find no one there. Just the dense fog outside and the sound of the waves lapping at the shore. In the doorway, a single, wet footprint lay in the sand, as if someone had just stepped away. The sight gave them goosebumps, and an unspoken fear passed among the friends. They were not alone. As the night deepened, the house grew colder. In the living room, while the friends huddled together with flashlights, the power went out, plunging them into darkness. In the eerie silence, a soft, sorrowful humming began to fill the air, a tune that sounded both beautiful and heart-wrenching. Marcus, with his heart pounding, shone his flashlight around the room and saw for a fleeting moment the outline of a young face, pale and sad, reflected in the window. It was as if the ghost of that long-lost spirit had come to visit them. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind an overwhelming feeling of grief and dread. The jump scare and the haunting melody merged to create an atmosphere that was almost too much to bear. And the friends decided to stay together in the living room until morning. The following day, still shaken, the group attempted to focus on their spring break plans. They went out for a hike along a rugged coastal trail, trying to escape the oppressive feeling of the house. But everywhere they went, the signs of a mysterious presence followed them. They found strange symbols carved into weathered rocks, symbols that none of them recognized, and whispered voices seemed to ride the wind in the trees. At one point, while walking through a dense patch of forest, Lily stopped abruptly. Ahead of her, half buried in the mud, lay an old locket. When she opened it, she discovered a faded picture of a young woman, her eyes filled with sorrow, and a date scrawled on the back that matched the legend Chloe had mentioned. The discovery sent chills through the group, and they felt as if the past was reaching out to them, urging them to remember something long forgotten, a tragedy that had tied the spirit to the land. That night, back at the cabin, the terror escalated. The wind howled outside as a violent storm erupted, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundation of the house. The group, now on edge, decided to hold a small seance in the living room, determined to communicate with the spirit and learn its story. They joined hands and, with shaky voices, called out for the ghost to show itself. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candles they had lit sputtered and flickered wildly. For several long minutes, nothing happened, and then a soft, clear voice spoke from the darkness. "I wish I could forget." It was a whisper so full of pain and regret that it made each of them tremble. Suddenly, the lights flashed back on, and in that brief moment, they saw her. The ghostly figure of a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes that held an ocean of sorrow. The figure stood at the edge of the circle, her transparent form shimmering in the candlelight, and then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished with a heart-stopping crash of thunder. In the aftermath of the seance, the friends were left shaken and unsure of what they had experienced. The ghost's words echoed in their minds, and they realized that this spring break, which they had hoped would be their last carefree adventure, was instead marked by a terrible secret. Over the next few days, the haunting continued. Objects moved on their own, doors creaked open with no explanation, and every shadow seemed to hide a ghostly face. The once beautiful beach now felt like a place of mourning, and the friends began to question whether they could ever escape the memories of that terrifying week. One final night, as the storm cleared and a pale moon rose over the water, the group gathered for one last time at the cabin. They decided to leave at first light, eager to put the nightmare behind them. As they sat together in the living room, sharing nervous laughter and trying to forget the horrors, a sudden, deafening knock echoed through the house. One that came not from the door, but from within the walls themselves. In unison, they froze. The knock was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming closer and closer. Panicked, they ran to the windows and peered out, only to see nothing but the dark, empty landscape. Then, in a final jump scare, the ghostly woman appeared right in front of them, her eyes burning with a mix of sorrow and fury. "I wish I could forget," she repeated, her voice now loud and clear, as if it were a curse. The shock of the moment was enough to make their hearts stop, and then, as if time itself had been shattered, the ghost faded into the darkness, leaving the room silent except for the sound of their trembling breaths. At dawn, with the nightmare of the past week still fresh in their minds, the friends packed their bags and left the cabin behind. They drove away in silence, each of them haunted by memories of that last spring break. A spring break they wished they could forget, but one that would forever be etched in their hearts and minds as the time when the past reached out from the darkness and changed their lives forever. And just like that, the perfect spring break became a nightmare. But some stories don't end, they just wait for the next victim. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.